Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers are advised that the following video may contain images and voices of deceased individuals. Viewer discretion is advised. Before beginning this project, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we live and study, being the Darug Nation, and would like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and future. The old African proverb, "It takes a whole village to raise a child," might be generations old, but still not irrelevant to the context of child protection. In the westernized modern world, a child is not intrinsically connected to their extended family and moves on from being the sole responsibility of his or her parents once they turn 18. This differs among many cultures, including the Indigenous culture, and feeds into much of what we will speak about in the following video essay. In Australia, the statistics concerning child protection grow alarmingly higher every year. Each year, more than 150,000 children seek child protection services, including investigations into living circumstances, foster care, and protection under out-of-home care. In spite of being only 5.9% of the Australian population, in their 2018 to 2019 Child Protection Report, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare reported that Indigenous Australian children are 8 times more likely to receive child protection than non-Indigenous children. Among the Indigenous population, there has been a long-standing conflict between child protection services and the rich Indigenous culture. The higher percentage of Indigenous children being in out-of-home care reflects the gaps between services in different social indicators. In out-of-home care facilities, children are subjected to physical and psychological ill-treatment, and sometimes, unfortunately, even sexual abuse. This uncovers the questionable nature of the entire child protection and out-of-home care systems, which we aim to reflect on in this presentation. This presentation aims to shed light on the Indigenous perspectives on child protection, while also exemplifying the necessity for interventions within various circumstances among Indigenous children and child services. Throughout this presentation, we have chosen to critically discuss 3 main theoretical frameworks. 1. The human rights theory, 2. Indigenous perspectives around child protection, and 3. The holistic theory. In addition to this, we have chosen to reflect on 2 case studies, the Canadian Hollow Water Program and the Boomerangs Coolamon Parenting Program. One of the most significant human rights issues in Australian history was the separation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families. Historically, the infamous stolen generations were implemented with intentions of child protection. However, the stolen generations produced transgenerational trauma among Indigenous Australians. This forced removal caused both identity and cultural losses that directly led to intergenerational trauma, and unfortunately also led to the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the child protection system. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child sets out specific rights that children have, including health, education, protection from violence, privacy, and the right to expression. It's important for social workers in child protection to engage with the child, respect and protect their privacy, especially Aboriginal children, due to the trauma resulting from the stolen generations. Human rights have much to offer on the issues relating to child protection within Indigenous communities. They offer a framework of critique for social workers, as well as a vision to critique the future, a future that is free from oppression with greater equity, equality, justice, and healthy sustainable environments. Social workers should settle for no less than full realization of human rights. Being in a developed Western country, Australia is the only country in the Western industrialized nation that does not have human rights legislation or a Bill of Rights. As social workers, our role is to focus on the ways we can contribute to the broader nature of human rights that we see within our professional practice. When looking at the right to self-determination, for example, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights to Indigenous People shows how far we have to go to realise the entitlements of Indigenous Australians. For example, Article 7 of the Declaration states that Indigenous peoples have the collective right to live in freedom, peace and security as distinct peoples, and shall not be subject to any act of genocide or any other act of violence, including forcibly removing children of the group to another group. However, more Indigenous children enter out-of-home care than non-Indigenous people in Australia today, and some are placed with non-Indigenous families. Furthermore, there are 3 types of human rights generations that are important for social workers to know. The second generation socio-economic rights guarantee equal conditions and treatment. These rights are most relevant to social work and can be adequately applied to Indigenous child protection. Acknowledging the Indigenous perspective, knowledge and voices of Indigenous people can help to decolonise the white-based and often modernistic approach to social work practice. Knowledge of Indigenous perspectives provides a holistic way to understanding the world by observing the connections between all of its parts. Indigenous culture is embedded within physical, emotional, spiritual and intellectual factors and is intrinsically connected to land, being inseparable from internal and external factors. It is complex, holistic and derives from the relationships between individuals, their families, their respective cultures, communities and nations. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of knowing, being and doing can be integrated with social work practice to recognise the concept of kinship for Indigenous people. For the implementation of the Indigenous perspective, it is critical to hear the stories and history that reside behind the statistics in order to help alleviate some of the ignorance of systemic interconnection issues in the child protection system. Not only this, but individualised approaches fail to address the magnitude of a problem and underlying causes. Taking these issues into account, child protection services should be based on the Indigenous perspective of collectivism that acknowledges community identity rather than an individually focused approach. Put simply, there is a need for an inclusive grassroots approach focused on the community. By bringing the Indigenous perspective in social work practice, practitioners can help to provide vital support and unification between parents, families, and children of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities.
So what changes can be implemented with the Indigenous perspective? All Indigenous children have a right to a bright, healthy and powerful future, a future that is shaped by their aspirations and unquestionable potential, rather than an entrenched disadvantage and low expectations. With the Indigenous perspective and knowledge, Indigenous children can grow up safe and cared for within their family, community and culture, with the help of a child empowerment approach. Families can have access to quality, cultural security, universal and tailored programs that are essential for the growth of Indigenous children. Indigenous peoples and organisations can participate and have control over decisions that affect the children. It can help self-determination and setting the expectations high and positive norms. It can help make child and family protection legislation, strategies, procedures culturally safe and sensitive. It can set a mutual obligation and respect between governments and community services to be accountable to Indigenous people. Taking a critical social work approach regarding Indigenous perspective will help Indigenous communities become more visible and audible. With the help of this approach, the majority of Indigenous children can live safely at home and can develop a clear identity to link their communities and culture.
Lightman states how the Indigenous community prefer the application of a holistic framework approach, as it gives them control and empowerment. The application of this approach involves examining social factors of an individual's life as opposed to solely focusing upon one issue. This involves considering their living environments, career, family, community, and cultures, which will allow social workers to perceive all major facets of a person's life to better determine the underlying issues which are prompting emotional distress, medical problems, or negative behaviours. In this case, child negligence or abuse. Thus allow them to formulate adequate plans for individuals to overcome the challenges. Livesden believes a holistic approach is the most appropriate for a child's well-being, as it allows for community collaboration, which will further empower them and cultivate their culture. The application of the holistic framework can be seen throughout the following case study, the Canadian Hello Water Program. The Canadian Hello Water Program, which will be referred as HWP, was founded in Manitoba, 1984, comprising of 4 Native American communities who came together with service providers, community volunteers, and political leaders to discuss the matter of child sexual abuse which was prevalent amongst the communities. Sexual abuse in Native American communities was a taboo subject, hence the matter was not dealt with sooner. Additionally, drug and alcohol abuse were a common factor throughout the community, which was eliciting these dysfunctional behaviors, which over time became normalized. In order to combat the matter of child sexual abuse and drug and alcohol addiction, it was discovered for adequate change to occur, the community is required to heal from intergenerational trauma. Additionally, the HWP aided in providing support, guidance, and counseling to those all affected by sexual abuse, including the victim, the perpetrator, and the respective families. The HWP program created local training for the Native community members, which aided them to regulate the alcohol and drug issues. Furthermore, these training services allowed them to acknowledge anger, dysfunction, and hurt that had built up. This method of intervention was highly influential, as it resulted in a high success rate of healing and combating this child sexual abuse and social issues. Additionally, it is seen as a long-term solution, as the whole process is estimated to take approximately 5 years. It allows for the empowerment of communities by allowing members to generate their own response to individual situation. Aboriginal practitioners utilize this program to argue how cultural healing programs are necessary, as ignoring the importance of cultural identity within child protection interventions is damaging and traumatizing for Indigenous children who may be experiencing abuse. Likewise, the Burun's Kuluman parenting program, which will be referred to as BCPP, was heavily founded upon cultural influence. It is a program located throughout southwest Sydney by the New South Wales government. The BCPP developer accentuated the significance of entrenching culture into the approach, and affirmed they would not run the program without an Aboriginal facilitator to ensure the program is provided correctly. So the program is managed by an Aboriginal health practitioner who is deeply connected to the Aboriginal community through community-controlled organisations, thus taking on an Indigenous perspective. It is a group-based program that caters up to 8 women. It focuses upon relationship-based parenting intervention and healing from trauma. The program runs for 8 weeks and concludes with a camp. Throughout the program, videos are used to show strength-based activities of parents and to coach parents in their parenting skills. One-to-one engagement through home visits can be included where appropriate. Often, the nature of the emotional group work and peer support throughout the program results in associates keeping in touch with participants following the program, strengthening informal support networks of participants. The program also incorporates a trauma-informed lens, aiding mothers to recognize the impact of trauma, how this might affect them, the child, and their parenting. This understanding, along with active skill building and coaching, helps parents to enact more effective parenting strategies and strengthen the parent-child relationship. The program reveals the importance of the role of the caregiver relationship on child development and pursues to promote more positive and foreseeable parent-child interactions within the Indigenous community. This program allows for the participant to understand the factors which contribute into creating a positive parent-child relationship. The facilitators perceive their participants through a holistic lens, as they recognize all factors including one's living environments, career, family, community, and cultures affecting the parent-child relationship. Both these case studies illustrate the importance of acquiring multi-dimensional interventions, including holistic cultural healing, human rights, and most importantly, an Indigenous perspective. It is vital to capture Indigenous Australians' needs when dealing with child protection interventions, as the cultivation of the culture, identity, and communities is essential for the child's well-being.
To summarise, understanding Indigenous child protection can help to transform the dominating white knowledge and power relationship by prioritising the unique epistemology of Indigenous approaches. Indigenous perspective can facilitate control among Indigenous communities over social services and can also be applied to community development and social policy development. Before finishing this video essay, we would like to leave you with a couple of questions to ponder. Number 1. Why do you think there is a gap between child protection social work policies and the Indigenous community? And number 2. Do you think your own personal opinion on the historical treatment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children will impact your professional and ethical practice in the future?